Eleanor Hawthorne, stirring my morning tea in the quiet of my seaside cottage, the kind of place where the waves whisper secrets to the shore, when my old rotary phone rattled on the wall. It was Mrs. Hargrove, the neighbor from my childhood home in Willow Creek, a voice I hadn't heard since the leaves turned gold a decade ago. Her message was clipped, no pleasantries, just a tremor in her words. "I'm so sorry about your folks, Eleanor. What I saw today, it broke my heart." Attached was a grainy video clip, forwarded from some church bulletin. I pressed play and the world tilted. There, in the dim glow of St. Mary's Chapel, the one with the stained glass windows depicting saints who'd long forgotten us sinners, stood my parents at the altar. Mother, Beatrice, in her somber velvet gown, pearls clutching her neck like a noose, wiping away tears that looked rehearsed. Father Harold, rigid as the oak pews, reading from a folded paper with a voice that cracked just enough to seem real. Behind them, a polished mahogany casket, flanked by lilies, and beside it, my portrait from years back, the one taken at the family picnic where I still believed in forever. "Eleanor was a wayward soul," Father intoned, "but we cherished her. We did all we could." My breath caught. Wayward? Cherished? I wasn't gone. I was here, alive, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. The video panned to the congregation. Aunts, uncles, old school friends, all in black, murmuring prayers for my eternal rest. Mother spoke of a tragic fall during my solitary hikes in the misty hills of Maine, where I'd supposedly vanished into the fog. No body recovered, just ashes scattered to the wind. But there'd been no fall. I'd left Willow Creek alive, fleeing the shadows of betrayal, building a new life in this coastal hideaway. As the clip looped, dread coiled in my gut like seaweed around a drowning man's ankle. Why this charade? What darkness were they burying with my name? The hook sank deeper as I replayed it, each viewing peeling back layers of a life I'd thought severed clean. Memories flooded in unbidden, the creak of our old Victorian house, the scent of Mother's lavender sachets, masking sharper smells, like deceit. I hadn't spoken to them in 5 years, not since the night they cast me out over whispers of theft I never committed. But to stage my death? To summon kin for a mock mourning? My hand shook as I gripped the phone, the sea outside roaring approval. This wasn't grief. It was a veil, thin and tearing. I felt the pull of truth, sharp as a riptide, dragging me back toward Willow Creek. What if this funeral hid something fouler, a secret that could unravel us all? I couldn't turn away now. The waves were rising, and I was caught in their swell. That afternoon, the salt air did little to calm the storm inside me. I paced the creaky floorboards of my cottage, the video still echoing in my ears. Mrs. Hargrove's call had cracked open a door I'd nailed shut, and now the past was seeping through like fog from the bay. I remembered the last time I'd seen Willow Creek, the autumn leaves blazing red, mirroring the anger in Father's eyes as he slammed the door. "You're dead to us," he'd said, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. But alive, I was a loose thread in their tapestry of perfection. I sat at my weathered desk, overlooking the crashing Atlantic, and began to piece it together. The chapel in the video was unmistakable, St. Mary's, where we'd attended every Sunday, Mother leading the choir and hymns that soared like accusations. The casket gleamed too brightly, a prop in their drama. And the date of my passing? It aligned with the winter I'd fled north, seeking anonymity in Portland's bookstores and quiet harbors. No accident had claimed me. I'd chosen exile over erasure. Yet here they were, erasing me anyway. Dread built slowly, a gathering thunderhead on the horizon. What if this wasn't just spite? What if Vivian, my younger sister, the one with the golden touch, always shielded from the family's sharper edges, had woven this lie for gain. I'd heard rumors through distant cousins, her sudden windfall, the grand wedding at the old manor. My mind raced, connecting dots like stars in an ominous constellation. I needed answers, but probing might summon ghosts better left undisturbed. Still, the video's final frame lingered. My portrait, eyes staring back, accusing. "Find out," they seemed to say, "before the tide turns against you." As evening fell, the lighthouse beams swept across my window, a rhythmic warning. I poured another cup of tea, its steam rising like unanswered prayers. The quest for truth had ignited, a spark in the dry tinder of my resolve. But with it came rising dread. What horrors lay buried under that false grave? The night deepened, waves pounding relentlessly, mirroring the pulse in my veins. I was alive, yes, but in their world, I was a specter now ready to haunt. The tea had gone cold in my hands, but I couldn't set it down, not with that video still replaying in my mind like a bad dream that refused to fade with the light. The lighthouse beam kept sweeping across the room, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, mirroring the unease twisting inside me. I'd built this life here on the rugged Maine coast, far from Willow Creek's manicured lawns and whispered judgments, thinking distance would heal the old wounds. But now, staring out at the churning Atlantic, I felt those scars splitting open, raw and insistent. How could they do this? Stage my death like some macabre theater piece? The question gnawed at me, pulling me back to that fateful evening 5 years ago, when the world I knew crumbled under the weight of lies. It was a crisp autumn night, the kind where the air smells of fallen leaves and impending frost, and our family home in Willow Creek glowed with the false warmth of candlelight. We'd gathered for what Mother called a reconciliation dinner, but the tension hung thick as fog rolling in from the bay. Vivian, my younger sister, sat across from me, her golden curls catching the light, her smile too perfect, too practiced. She'd always been the favorite one, the child who could charm her way out of any scrape, while I, Eleanor, was the steady one, the bookkeeper who balanced the family's antique shop accounts with quiet precision. That night, Father announced the discrepancy, funds missing from the business. Nearly $50,000 vanished like smoke. His eyes, usually distant, bored into mine with accusation. "Eleanor, how could you?" he thundered, slamming the ledger on the table. I remember the shock freezing me in place, my fork clattering to the plate. It wasn't me. I'd never touched a dime beyond what was owed. But Vivian's gaze darted away, her fingers twisting a napkin under the tablecloth, and in that moment, I knew. She'd been reckless. Lavish parties in the city, debts piled high from her artistic pursuits that amounted to little more than fleeting whims. When the auditors closed in, they needed a scapegoat, and I was it. Mother leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper laced with lavender perfume. Better to lose one than drag us all down. Father didn't even glance my way as he declared, "You're no longer part of this family." They bundled me out that very night. No severance, no farewell. Just the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot in the quiet street. The betrayal hit like a nor'easter, shattering every illusion I'd clung to about loyalty and blood ties. I'd grown up believing family was an unbreakable chain, forged in the fires of shared history. The summer picnics by the creek, the winter evenings reading aloud from dusty novels. But that night, it all unraveled, leaving me adrift. I wandered the back roads of Willow Creek in the dark, tears blurring the stars, wondering how my own kin could cast me aside like yesterday's news. By dawn, I'd hitched a ride north, landing in Portland's foggy harbors, where I pieced together a new existence, working in a dusty bookstore, shelving tomes that spoke of redemption and revenge. I tried reaching out, letters sent to aunts and uncles, calls that went unanswered, doors that stayed firmly shut. One by one, the connections severed until I was a ghost in my own story. Yet, even in exile, hope flickered like a distant lighthouse, faint but persistent. I'd change my routines, avoid old haunts online, but deep down, I waited for a sign, a call, a note saying it was all a mistake. That hope dimmed over the years, replaced by a quiet resilience, but now with this video unearthing the past, it ignited into something fiercer. What if Vivian's hand was in this too? The rumors of her sudden prosperity, the grand wedding I'd glimpsed in fleeting social media shadows, they hinted at motives darker than mere spite. As the waves crashed below my cottage, I felt a chilled wind of suspicion. This faux funeral wasn't just erasure. It was a calculated move, perhaps to claim what was mine, an inheritance from grandmother's estate, tied up in trusts I'd long forgotten. The dread deepened, a undercurrent pulling me toward confrontation. I couldn't ignore it. The storm was building, and I was sailing straight into its heart, secrets swirling like debris in the tide. The storm clouds gathered thicker that night, the lighthouse beam cutting through the darkness like a knife through fog, illuminating fragments of a life I'd tried to reassemble far from the suffocating grip of Willow Creek. I couldn't shake the video's grip on me, the way father's voice cracked just so, or mother's tears that seemed scripted from one of those old melodramas she loved. But beneath the dread, a stubborn spark flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding, a cruel twist of fate that could be unraveled with a few honest words. So, in the dim glow of my desk lamp, with the Atlantic roaring its indifference below, I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling as if dialing into the past itself. First, I tried Aunt Lydia, mother's sister, the one who'd always slipped me extra cookies during holiday gatherings, her laughter a warm counterpoint to the family's colder edges. The line rang twice, then her voice, frail and hesitant. "Hello?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight as a sailor's knot. "Aunt Lydia, it's Eleanor. I need to talk about what's happening." Silence stretched like the miles between us, then a sharp intake of breath. "Eleanor? But no, this isn't right." Click. The line went dead, leaving only the hum of disconnection echoing in my ear. I stared at the receiver, the weight of her words sinking in like lead. She believed it. The fall, the ashes, the end of me. Undeterred, or perhaps desperate, I dialed Cousin Henry next, the boy who'd once shared my love for scavenging seashells on family vacations, now a grown man with a family of his own in the suburbs. "Henry, it's me, Eleanor. Listen, there's been a terrible mistake." His response came quick, laced with unease. "Who is this really? If this is some prank," I pleaded, my voice cracking, recounting the night of the accusation, the missing funds that weren't my doing. But he cut me off, his tone hardening like frost on window panes. "We were told you were gone. Don't drag this up now." Another door slammed shut, this one digital, as he blocked my number mid-sentence. One by one, I tried them all. Old friends from the antique shop, even the pastor from St. Mary's who'd baptized me under those stained glass saints. Responses varied from polite deflections to outright hostility, whispers of ghost and imposter filtering through before the lines went silent. Each rejection piled on like driftwood after a gale, heavy and unyielding, until I felt buried under the weight of their collective dismissal. What secrets were they guarding that made my voice so threatening? I imagined Vivian orchestrating it all, her golden curls framing a face now etched with calculation, perhaps funneling grandmother's inheritance into her lavish life while I faded into obscurity. The thought sent a chill deeper than the coastal winds, a Geican twist that hinted at something more sinister. Had they forged documents? Paid off officials to seal my fate? Paranoia crept in, shadows lengthening in my mind as I paced the cottage, the floorboards creaking like accusations. With no anchors left in Willow Creek, I deepened my exile, fleeing even further north to a tiny village on the Canadian border where the winters bit hard and the locals asked few questions. There, in a rented cabin overlooking frozen lakes, I took a job cataloging books in a musty library, surrounding myself with stories of others' redemptions to drown out my own isolation. Faint hopes lingered in those early months, a postcard that might arrive, an email from an overlooked relative saying they'd uncovered the truth. I'd stare at the horizon during long walks, the snow crunching underfoot, whispering prayers to the indifferent sky. But as seasons turned, those hopes dimmed, fading into the gray monotony of survival. Letters I sent returned unopened, calls echoed into voids. I became a shadow of myself, alive but unseen, the world moving on without me. Yet in that quiet desolation, a resolve began to harden like ice over still waters. What if this erasure wasn't the end, but the prelude to a reckoning? The dread evolved, no longer just fear, but a simmering anticipation pulling me toward the unknown depths where truths lay hidden, waiting to surface. The isolation of that border village wrapped around me like a shroud, the frozen lakes mirroring the numbness that had settled in my bones. But beneath it all, that simmering anticipation gnawed relentlessly, urging me to plunge deeper into the shadows. I'd convinced myself that the silence from Willow Creek was just their way of moving on, a collective amnesia to preserve their polished facade. But one crisp morning, as the first thaw cracked the ice with sharp echoing pops, I decided to test the digital waters. Sitting at the library's ancient terminal computer, surrounded by shelves of forgotten volumes that smelled of mildew and lost time, I attempted to log into my old email account, the one tied to family newsletters and distant cousins' updates. The screen blinked back an error. Account deactivated. User reported deceased. My fingers froze on the keys, the cursor pulsing like a heartbeat in denial. Deceased. It had to be a glitch, some bureaucratic mix-up from my prolonged absence. I contacted support through a chat window, my messages typed with deliberate calm, explaining I was very much alive, providing my full name, Eleanor Hathorn, and the last known details. The response came swiftly, impersonal as a form letter. Records indicate Eleanor Hawthorne passed away in a hiking incident, confirmed by family submission. Account closure is permanent. A chill swept through me, colder than the wind whistling through the cabin's drafty windows that night. This wasn't amnesia. It was annihilation. I dug further, pulling up public databases from my laptop back at the cabin, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows on the log walls. There it was, stark and official. Eleanor Hawthorne, date of death matching the winter I'd fled north, cause listed as accidental fall in remote terrain, no body recovered, cremation noted. Forged. Every line screamed fabrication. My passport tucked in a drawer bore stamps from that very period, proving I'd been crossing borders, breathing, existing. The realization hit like a rogue wave crashing against the cliffs, transforming my confusion into a bone-deep dread of deliberate erasure. Who had filed this? Vivian's face flashed in my mind, her golden curls now twisted in my imagination into something serpentine. Had she orchestrated this to seal her gains? Perhaps dipping into grandmother's trust fund that was meant for both of us? I recalled whispers from our childhood, how she'd always envied my steadiness, plotting small revenges like hiding my books or spreading rumors at school. But this? This was a grave dug with legal precision. Paranoia bloomed as I paced the cabin, the floorboards groaning underfoot like warnings. What if they hadn't stopped at digital death? What if watchers were out there ensuring the lie held? That evening, a strange car idled on the village road outside, its headlights piercing the dusk before vanishing. Coincidence? Or a harbinger? I couldn't sleep. The northern lights dancing mockingly across the sky as if illuminating hidden paths. Instead, I compiled evidence, scanned copies of my work visas, bank statements from Portland cafes where I'd waited cables, even a faded receipt from a bookstore purchase dated after my demise. Each piece fueled a fire within, turning dread into determination. But the Guy Kun undercurrent persisted. What if uncovering this pulled me into a deeper web, one where Vivian's ambitions intertwined with darker family secrets, like the unexplained disappearances in our lineage that Mother always dismissed? The erasure felt personal, a calculated strike to rewrite history, leaving me a specter in my own narrative. As dawn broke over the thawing lakes, I knew I had to confront it, but the anticipation twisted sharper now, a blade poised at the edge of revelation, drawing me inexorably back toward Willow Creek's veiled truths. The northern lights had faded into a pale dawn, leaving the sky over the cabin a washed-out gray, much like the haze that had settled over my thoughts since unearthing that forged death certificate. I'd spent the night hunched over my laptop, the screen's glow reflecting off the thawing ice outside, piecing together fragments of a life that no longer included me. But as the coffee brewed on the wood stove, filling the air with its bitter promise, I found myself drawn to the one place I hadn't dared venture in years, Vivian's online world. She'd always been the one to flaunt her existence, posting snapshots of her so-called artistic triumphs, gallery openings in the city, weekends at lakeside retreats that echoed our childhood summers in Willow Creek, but polished to an unnatural sheen. With a steadying breath, I typed her name into the search bar, my fingers hesitant, as if expecting the keys to bite back. What unfolded was a glittering parade of excess, her social media feeds a carousel of white lace and champagne flutes, diamonds catching the light like distant stars mocking my isolation. There she was, in a series of photos from what looked like a lavish wedding at the old Hawthorne Manor, the very estate grandmother had left in trust for us both. Aunt Lydia beamed beside her, toasting with a glass raised high, her smile oblivious to the call she'd hung up on me just weeks before. Cousins clustered around, clinking crystal, their laughter frozen in pixels, while great-uncle Elias, who'd rarely left his Boston brownstone, stood in the background, his presence a puzzle that tugged at something uneasy in my gut. Not a single caption mentioned me, no wistful "wish Eleanor were here," no shadowed nod to a lost sister. It was as if I'd never existed, airbrushed out of the family portrait with ruthless efficiency. But then, in one candid shot from the reception, Vivian's husband, a sharp-featured man I'd never met with eyes that seemed to appraise everything like assets, raised a microphone for a toast. Beside him, father gripped a wine glass, his grin wide and untroubled, the caption reading, "To our shining daughter, who's brought light to our legacy." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading to darker suspicions. Shining daughter? Singular? I scrolled deeper, my heart pounding against the cabin's quiet, uncovering posts from months after my death, a new home in the hills overlooking Willow Creek, renovations funded by a sudden influx, vacations to European villas that screamed inheritance windfall. Grandmother's trust, meant to split between us for education or ventures, had been rerouted entirely to Vivian. Documents quietly filed 6 months post my fabricated demise. How? A quick search of public registries confirmed it. Transfers approved under the guise of sole heirship. My name struck through like an errant line in a ledger. The chill deepened as I pieced it together, the wood stove's warmth doing little to ward off the ice in my veins. This wasn't mere opportunism. It felt orchestrated, Vivian's hand guiding the strings. Had she whispered in Father's ear, amplifying old grievances until my erasure became profitable? And what of that idling car outside last night? Had word of my probing reached them? A warning dispatched to silence the specter? Paranoia wrapped tighter, visions of shadowy figures combing village records, or worse, tracing my digital footprints back to this remote haven. Yet, amid the dread, a fire kindled, resolve hardening like the frost on the window panes. They'd profited from my grave, turning loss into luxury. But I held the proofs now. Visas, statements, timestamps that screamed survival. Justice wasn't a distant shore anymore. It was a tide rising, pulling me toward confrontation. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the lake, I knew I couldn't linger in this frozen limbo. The web they'd spun was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was the one wielding the scissors, ready to cut through to the heart of their deceit. The unraveling had begun in earnest that gray morning, the lake outside my cabin still half frozen, its surface cracked like the facade of my family's lies. And I knew I couldn't wield those scissors from afar any longer. I'd stared at Vivian's wedding photos until the pixels blurred, her diamond ring a glaring symbol of stolen futures, and something inside me shifted. Not just anger, but a calculated calm, the kind that comes after storms when the air clears and decisions harden. I packed a small duffel with essentials, my passport, those damning bank statements from Portland, work visas stamped with dates that mocked my official demise, and even a faded journal where I'd chronicled the early days of exile, entries laced with the raw ache of abandonment. These weren't just papers, they were ammunition, proof that I'd breathed and struggled while they toasted over my grave. But ammunition needed aim. So I drove south under a leaden sky, the road winding through pine forests that whispered warnings, toward a small law office in Bangor, a place I'd found through discreet inquiries at the library. Nothing traceable, nothing that could alert shadows if they were indeed watching. The attorney, Mr. Caldwell, was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a desk cluttered with case files that smelled of aged paper and quiet victories. He leaned back in his creaky chair as I laid out the folder, my voice steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. "They declared me dead, Mr. Caldwell. Forged records, transferred assets, my grandmother's trust, all to my sister. He scanned the documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page, the room silent except for the tick of a wall clock that seemed to count down to some inevitable clash. "This is fraud, plain and vicious," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "We'll file a petition to vacate the death declaration, cite the forgeries, and pursue embezzlement charges. But, Eleanor, this could drag on. Courts move slow, and families like yours, they fight dirty." I nodded, the weight of his words settling like fog on the bay. But I had no patience for drawn-out battles, not when an anonymous tip had slipped into my inbox that very morning. A memorial service for me, scheduled at St. Mary's in Willow Creek, just days away. No cinder, just coordinates and a time, as if fate itself was handing me the stage. We spent hours mapping it out, Caldwell's pen scratching notes while I paced, the office's fluorescent hum amplifying the tension. He'd handle the legal barrage, subpoenas for records, affidavits for my employers up north, but I needed something immediate, a disruption that would expose their charade before they could bury the evidence deeper. The plan coalesced like a gathering thunderhead. I'd return incognito, slip into the chapel amid the mourners, and at the pivotal moment, reveal myself with the documents in hand. "Risky," Caldwell warned, his eyes sharp with concern. "They might call security, claim you're an imposter. And if Vivian's as cunning as you say," he trailed off, but I felt the gay con pull. But what ifs swirling? What if she'd hired someone to watch for resurrections? What if the car idling outside my cabin had been no coincidence? A scout ensuring the dead stayed silent. Paranoia edged in, visions of being dragged away before I could speak. Or worse, an accident engineered to make the lie truth. But the fire burned hotter, fueled by years of silence. By afternoon, I left with copies notarized, a motion drafted to revoke my death, and Caldwell's promise to stand ready. The drive back north felt charged, the pines blurring past as I rehearsed my entrance in my mind, the doors creaking open, gasps rippling through the pews, my voice cutting through their scripted grief like a lighthouse beam through storm. But doubt crept in with the encroaching dusk. What hidden motives lurked beyond the inheritance? Grandmother's estate held more than money. Old letters, perhaps, hinting at family scandals Vivian wanted sealed. The anonymous tip nagged me, too. Ally or trap? As night fell, the cabin welcomed me with its familiar creaks. But sleep evaded, replaced by a vigil at the window, scanning the dark road for headlights. The web was tearing, yes, but spiders don't yield easily. They strike back. Still, I clutched the folder tighter, resolve steeling against the unknown, the memorial looming like a siren's call, promising revelation or ruin. The vigil at my window stretched into the small hours, the dark road outside empty save for the occasional sweep of headlights from a passing trucker, but each beam set my nerves jangling like loose rigging in a gale. I'd clutched that folder of proofs through the night, the papers crinkling under my grip as if whispering reassurances, yet the shadows in my mind twisted them into doubts. What if the anonymous tip was a lure, drawing me into a trap where Vivian's cunning waited like a hidden reef? Dawn broke pale and hesitant over the lake, the ice groaning as it thawed further, mirroring the cracks in my resolve. But there was no turning back. The memorial at St. Mary's loomed like an inevitable tide, and I had to ride it or be swept under. I dressed carefully in layers that could pass for morning attire, a long black coat from the village thrift, a scarf to veil my features, sunglasses perched on my nose like a shield against recognition. The drive south felt interminable, the pines blurring into a green haze, my thoughts racing ahead to Willow Creek's familiar streets, now laced with peril. By midday, the chapel came into view, its steeple piercing the overcast sky like an accusation, cars crowding the lot in a somber procession that spoke of gathered kin and feigned sorrow. I parked a block away, heart thudding against my ribs as I slipped into the throng of arrivals, my disguise holding under cursory glances, hats dipped low, umbrellas unfurled against a light drizzle that seemed scripted for the occasion. Inside, the air hung heavy with incense and hushed whispers, the stained glass saints gazing down impassively as mourners filled the pews. I took a seat near the back, anonymous amid the black-clad figures, my eyes scanning for threats. Vivian up front, her golden curls pinned elegantly, chatting with Aunt Lydia in tones too light for grief. Father rigid beside Mother, his hand on her shoulder like a prop. The organ swelled into a dirge, candles flickering under my portrait, the one from that long-ago picnic, my smile now a mocking echo, and the priest began his solemn intonations, weaving tales of my tragic fall with practiced piety. Tension coiled in my chest as the service unfolded, each eulogy a layer of varnish over their deceit. Cousin Henry spoke of childhood adventures by the creek, his voice cracking just enough to sell the lie, while I gripped the pew, fingers white-knuckled, waiting for the moment. But then, a prickle at my neck. A man in a dark suit, lingering by the side door, his gaze sweeping the crowd too deliberately. Was he security, hired to guard against resurrections? Or worse, someone Vivian had dispatched, eyes sharp as the rumors I'd heard of her ties to shady fixers in the city. My breath shallowed, the folder heavy in my coat like a concealed weapon as I shifted subtly, heart pounding in sync with the organ's low notes. The priest called for testimonies, and Vivian rose, her voice trembling artfully. Eleanor was complicated, but she was my sister. I wish we'd had more time. Lies, polished and poignant, drawing sniffles from the assembly. I timed it then, as heads bowed for a moment of silence, the room falling into a breathless hush that amplified every creak, every rustle. Rising slowly, I moved toward the aisle, the drizzle outside tapping the windows like impatient fingers, my steps deliberate on the worn carpet. Gasps rippled as I approached the front, shedding the sunglasses to reveal eyes that burned with unspoken accusations. The man by the door tensed, hand dipping toward his pocket. A phone or something more sinister. Vivian's face drained of color, her pearls clutched like a lifeline, while Father's mouth gaped, the wine glass in his hand slipping to shatter on the stone floor, shards scattering like broken illusions. Mother feigned a faint, slumping dramatically, but I didn't falter, pulling the folder free as the priest stammered, "Who? Who are you?" The congregation stirred, phones emerging to capture the unraveling, whispers exploding into murmurs. I locked eyes with Vivian, the air thick with the scent of lilies and betrayal, and spoke into the chaos. "I'm Eleanor, and I've come to bury the lies, not myself." The man's hand paused, the room teetering on the edge of eruption, dread and defiance mingling in my veins like storm-tossed waves. What would he do? What hidden card did they hold? The confrontation hung there raw and electric, pulling everyone deeper into the vortex I'd unleashed. The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, thick and acrid, as I stood there at the front of St. Mary's, the folder open in my hands, pages fluttering slightly in the draft from the open doors. The congregation's murmurs swelled into a low roar, phones held aloft now, red lights blinking like distant buoys warning of hidden rocks. Vivian's face twisted, not in shock, but something sharper, a flash of calculation behind those wide eyes, as if she were already spinning a new web to ensnare me. The man by the side door stepped forward, his hand emerging from his pocket with a phone. Not a weapon, but I felt the threat all the same. Perhaps dialing reinforcements or recording to twist later. Father's shattered glass lay in pieces at his feet, wine pooling like blood on the stone floor, while Mother stirred from her faint, her eyes darting to Vivian for cues, the performance cracking under the weight of reality. I didn't waver, my voice cutting through the chaos like a foghorn over stormy seas. No fall in the hills, no ashes scattered to the winds. These are my visas, my pay stubs from the bookstores in Portland, timestamps that prove I walked this earth while you buried an empty name. I held up the documents, letting the light from the stained glass windows catch the official seals, saints above seeming to nod in judgment. Gasps rippled outward, Aunt Lydia clutching her chest, Cousin Henry lowering his phone as doubt crept into his features. Vivian lunged a step, her pearl snapping with a faint crack, voice hissing low, "This is madness. You're not her." But the crowd shifted, whispers turning to questions, someone in the back calling out, "Let her speak." The man hesitated, glancing at Father who stood frozen, his rigid posture crumbling like eroded cliffs, and speak I did. Laying bare the transfers, the trust fund siphoned to Vivian's accounts, the forged certificate that sealed my digital grave. "You didn't mourn a sister," I said to her directly, the air between us charged with years of unspoken resentments. "You built your empire on my bones." Her husband edged away, discomfort etching his sharp features, as if sensing the tide turning against their carefully constructed life. The priest, stammering, tried to intervene, but it was too late. The lies unraveled thread by thread, phones capturing every unraveling moment, the video likely already spreading like wildfire across old family networks. Vivian's composure shattered then, a sob escaping that sounded genuine for the first time, her golden curls disheveled as she clutched the pew. Father slumped, Mother whispering frantic denials, but the assembly's eyes were on me now, a reckoning unfolding in real time. In the days that followed, it played out like scenes from a half-remembered film, fragments piecing into resolution. I handed the folder to Caldwell, watched as he filed the motions, the death certificate revoked in a quiet courtroom where the judge's gavel echoed like final thunder. Investigations bloomed, fraud charges sticking to Vivian like barnacles, embezzlement unraveling her lavish facade, assets frozen pending trial. Willow Creek buzzed with the scandal, distant relatives reaching out with apologies laced in awkwardness, doors creaking open where once they'd slammed shut. I walked the coastal paths near my cabin, the Atlantic's roar a soothing counterpoint to the chaos, feeling the weight lift, a rebirth not in fire, but in the quiet persistence of truth. No more shadows idling on roads, no more digital ghosts. I was flesh and bone again, charting my own course under vast skies. Yet in those moments, alone with the waves, I wondered if forgiveness lingered on some distant horizon, or if some wounds were meant to scar over, reminders of depths we'd plumbed. The lighthouse beam swept across the bay one final evening, casting long fingers of light into my cottage, where I'd returned after the storm had passed. The investigations wrapped up quietly, Vivian's empire crumbling under the weight of audits and admissions, her golden facade tarnished but not entirely broken. Perhaps she'd find her own path to redemption, far from Willow Creek's judgmental whispers. Father and Mother retreated into silence, their Victorian home now echoing with the ghosts of choices made, letters from me left unopened but no longer returned. I chose not to press for more than justice required, letting the legal tides carry what was due, reclaiming grandmother's trust, not for vengeance, but for the freedom it promised, a small gallery in Portland where I'd curate stories from dusty tomes, sharing tales of resilience with passerbys who lingered in the warm light. As the seasons turned, the Maine coast softened, wildflowers blooming along the cliffs, where once only thorn had clung. I walked those paths often, the salt air cleansing old wounds, reminding me that family isn't always blood, but the anchors we choose in life's relentless currents. To you, dear listener, who've journeyed with me through these shadowed depths, remember this. Betrayal may bury us in darkness, but truth is the quiet light that guides us back. Like seeds planted in barren soil, we endure winters of isolation, only to emerge stronger, roots deepened by adversity. Cherish the bonds that lift you, release those that bind, and know that rebirth awaits not in grand spectacles, but in the simple act of rising each dawn. May your own stories find their harbors, safe and illuminated, where forgiveness blooms not from obligation, but from the heart's gentle wisdom. Sleep well tonight, wrapped in that peace.